For our final keynote of the day, please welcome Marc Carena, Regional President Europe, Central Eurasia and International Travel for Mars Wrigley. Marc will be interviewed by Shoptalk's VP of Original Content and Strategy, Ben Miller.
Well, very warm welcome to Shoptalk Europe, Marc.
Thank you, Ben.
Joining us.
Great to be here.
Look, Mars Snacking is one of the very, very few global CPGs that has shared an incredibly ambitious growth target. So maybe we could start by putting Mars Snacking into context with Mars Inc. and then talking about the thinking behind your ambitious growth.
Yeah, so Mars Snacking is basically part of Mars Inc., which is a 50+ billion company with around 150,000 employees, or as we call them, associates. And we have three divisions. One is food and nutrition, pet care, and snacking. And snacking within that is around 40% of this 50 billion. We are globally the leader in confectionery with iconic brands like M&M's, Twix, Snickers, Maltesers, and others. And as you alluded to, we have a very strong growth ambition, which we publicly announced. We want to reach 30 billion by 2030. Which will be a 50% increase of where we are today. And we want to achieve that through organic as well as inorganic growth. And maybe you saw last few acquisitions we did. The most recent ones were Trufry, which is frozen desserts, and the premium chocolate brand in the UK called Hotel Chocolat, which we bought recently.
Yeah.
And in terms of my remit, where I'm looking after, I have the privilege to lead, is Europe and Central Eurasia. This includes 55 markets, basically from Portugal to Mongolia and from Greenland to Israel. And we also have a very high ambition to be market leading in our geography. And with our fantastic team, we already managed in the last 3 years to get very close to that with 3 years of double-digit growth.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So yeah, if anybody didn't quite hear the messages, that's consecutive years of double-digit growth, ambition to grow from 20 billion to 30 billion, which is highly unusual in the large CPG space, and acquisitions. So I think a lot of people who are in the room who are very close to the FMCG, CPG sector will know that you are in the process of trying to acquire Kellanova. Kellanova, the manufacturers of Kellogg's, of Pringles. I think the 36 billion potential acquisition makes it something like the third biggest ever grocery or CPG acquisition. So great. Look, I'm glad we've got this really kind of intimate setting amongst friends to be able to talk about something as private and sensitive as this. When's it going to all clear? What's the plan? What's the thinking?
Well, I cannot give you too many secrets, but clearly we have to change our ambition because we will already reach over 30 billion with this potential acquisition. But in terms of where we are currently, so we are super excited to have this opportunity because we see Kellanova as extremely complementary to our portfolio. We have both a very strong purpose-led history. We have very strong people culture. We have very complementary and iconic brand, like you mentioned, Kellogg's, Pringles, but of course M&M's and Snickers as well. And we have a very strong performance for over a century with a strong focus on sustainability.
Okay.
And all this combined makes us really excited now to combine this in a, if you want, a once-in-a-lifetime generational opportunity to shape snacking in a new direction by combining both the route to markets and R&D capabilities between the two companies.
The complementary portfolios, that's a lovely sort of press release term. What does that really mean?
Yeah, so the total snacking category as we see it, we believe it's around $1.1 trillion.
Yeah.
And we are currently covering with Mars Snacking around 1/3, which is mainly the confectionery area. And with the potential Kellanova portfolio, we would have a coverage of over 50%. Also, what's maybe interesting is that Kellanova has a very big strength in emerging markets, especially in Africa, where we are not so strong, while we have a very strong coverage in China and Eastern Europe, where Kellanova is maybe not so strong. So that's why we believe it's very much complementary for our portfolio.
So that's the acquisition. Huge story. But it's easy to get distracted by that big number and lose sight of that incredible organic growth story that you've been having. There are not many people who are delivering such high levels of organic growth in developed categories in Europe. So the question is really simple. How? How are you achieving this at the moment?
Well, you might be surprised that there's no real big secret. So while innovation NPD is always seen as the main driver of category growth, we follow very much an evidence-based marketing approach. So we believe to really focus on core products and really do simply brilliant execution at the transaction zone and at the checkouts. And we see that when you have a great team, which really works closely together across the region, and then also have a clear focus on what are the priorities, what are the bold choices you're making with putting the resources behind, and focus on mental as well as physical availability, meaning amazing brand execution, but also being everywhere the consumer is, and working with customers very closely to achieve category growth. All this as a package, you can achieve strong double-digit growth without having massive new innovation.
Okay, there's a couple of things you mentioned there, Marc. You talked about evidence-based marketing, so I want to come back and talk about marketing. You talked about this idea of mental and physical availability. So that sounds really interesting. I'll come back to that. And we also talk about driving category growth in close collaboration and transaction zone. Let's dive into that one. Can you kind of share a bit more an example of how you're bringing this collaborative approach to life?
Oh, yeah, with pleasure. So if you look at transaction zone, it means basically the place where you pay before you finish your shopping. And we have a very strong experience in this. As you know, we basically almost invented as a company the transaction zone. 134 years ago, William Wrigley was selling chewing gums at the payment place or the transaction zone and basically created through that the first transaction zone. So all this knowledge we obviously now use very heavily, and it's not just important for us, but if you look at the retailer and you take transaction zone separately, if you want, as a category, it will immediately end up in the top 10 categories of every single store and be on average around 50% more profitable than any other grocery category in the store. And therefore, what we are trying to do is basically work with our retailer partners together to really help to leverage this potential. And we have unique proprietary tools to really analyze through insights as well as through planning how do we manage a transaction zone in the best way to define perfect merchandising guidelines and then therefore a perfect planogram to really drive the offtake. And we know when we do this well at scale with the retailer, we can up to triple the conversion rate at the transaction zone and therefore triple the turnover.
Okay. It seems a quite a brave choice to call out transaction zone at a time when many retailers are looking at trying to remove friction, trying to make it seamless, trying to automate their transaction zones. So kind of why the focus, and how do you think at Mars you can, as a manufacturer, how can you influence what retailers are doing in that space?
Yeah, maybe it's important to know that for the shopper, for 85% of the shopper, the transaction zone process, the payment process, is making or breaking the whole shopping trip. So I think it's very important for the retailer also to really look at that. But if you look now specifically in our case, I think we see two big trends. One is that the retailers are under high cost pressure. So they try to reduce operational costs and reduce the merchandising needs at the transaction zone. And like you said, move into self-checkouts and automation. And we see the shopper being very demanding, wanting more speed and more convenience. And when you now combine the two, what we see is that, unfortunately, very often retailers implement solutions which are not fully connected end-to-end and more like in piecemeal or in silos. And what then happens is that we have then an issue at the checkout because we don't have the right shopper flow or too many shoppers in the wrong place. And what we're trying to do is to really have an integrated approach, and we have created an internal design consultancy team which really helps the retailer to really work on this and bring in all the data in terms of shopper flow as well as assortment, then define the exact floor planning, the exact fixtures you need and what capacity, and then the planogram and the portfolio, and really help to achieve this seamless customer or shopper experience, which then really drives much more conversion rate. So that's what we're trying to do. And for example, there's a few retailers in this room, two of them are also here. We do this at this moment with Rewe and Aldi, for example, exactly that project. Okay.
So internal design consultancy kind of a really nice example of what kind of true category partnership and collaboration looks like. So that's physical checkout, I want to talk about digital checkouts. So, impulse categories like yours have traditionally been really hard to move, and penetration and fair share has been behind. So, how are you thinking at Mars Wrigley about the role of digital commerce?
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, we invest heavily in digital capabilities as well, and as you clearly understand, when you are in a traditional checkout, you have a whole assortment which your shopper can look at. And now in a digital impulse, you don't really see that many SKUs. So you really need to have a very strong focus on have the right targeted product, which is personalized to you, and the high visibility. So what we did is we took all the knowledge and experience we have from the transaction zone and then developed, redefined, and now lead on industry level also the digital impulse part. And we have many very exciting partnerships. For example, we have an exclusive incubator partnership with Tesco. We are also the category captain for a large online retailer like Uber Eats or Glovo as well, where we basically work exactly on that topic.
Okay, so two really interesting and very, very different businesses, Tesco and Glovo. So incubator with Tesco, what does that mean? What does that involve, Marc?
Yeah, good question. So instead of having the key account talking to a buyer, we really try to now connect the two tech teams. So speaking tech to tech and really work on the customer experience. We have developed a few proprietary tools to help Tesco in that specific case to really test different versions of transaction zones or digital transaction zones and help them to save money and time. And we work with them together now to create a so-called TikTokified transaction zone, which you will see when you go on the Tesco webpage. So that's what we do with Tesco. And with Glovo and with Uber Eats, we work very hard also on the retail media side. And we basically try to optimize together how can we improve the impact of retail media. And we received just recently, besides from Glovo, the Retail Excellence Award from them as the best company in that area to focus on transaction zones.
Okay, really interesting. You mentioned retail media. I'd like to come back to that, but what I'd like to cover first, Marc, is something that you mentioned earlier, which was about physical and mental availability. So we just covered quite a lot of physical availability, transaction zone, point of distribution, brilliant basics. What do you mean by mental availability?
So mental availability is basically top of mind awareness. As we have mostly impulse product, it's very important that the consumer, which doesn't need our product if you want, or doesn't plan our product, really sees them whenever he does the purchase at the end. And that's what we see as this. So what we try to do is to evolve and adapt our communication to the consumer through the different media, if you want, ecosystem, and have very strong and impactful campaign to really connect with the consumer over time.
Okay. The changing media ecosystem, big theme, big topic. So what do you see as the changing media ecosystem? And then what are you then doing about it? How does Mars behave differently because of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, how we behave. We basically increase substantially our media investment, and we focus now between 60 and 70% of all our media online.
Okay.
But most importantly, we focus on three important things, which is we want to create brands with clear brand purposes, but also with clear identity. We are trying to have personalization at scale based on data.
Okay.
And we try to create brand worlds which are really co-created by fans and community. So in all these three things, we try to make sure that we have the right engagement at the right time, with the right product, at every relevant touch point for everyone, which then helps us to drive conversion and also then therefore results. And the other big shift we did, which maybe other companies haven't done yet, is we move more and more away from paid media because we believe it's important to have really a more localized approach in media. So we focus much more on the earned and shared channels, and also use our own media much more whenever it's relevant. So that's really a big shift compared to the past in terms of media investment.
All right. Marc, there's some really big concepts there. So first of all, right engagement, right place, right time, easy to say, really, really hard to do. And then this whole idea of earned and shared and trying to drive that. So again, can you give us an example of it's kind of almost focused probably on the first bit. How do you make all this happen? What are you doing with one of your brands to be able to activate against this?
So I can take the example of one of our flagship brands, which is Orbit and Extra, which is, we are very strong in chewing gum and we're a significant player there. And what we realized from consumer research is that basically we were not positioned in the right place. So we were always focusing on freshening or mouth freshening. And we realized more and more that especially the younger consumers basically chewed gum more to have a mental break or potentially to keep going in stress situation. So we termed this as mood management. And we started to shift the entire brand platform towards a campaign we called Chew Good campaign. And we want to create Orbit and Extra as somehow like a chewing companion, which helps you in a me moment you need when you're in a chaotic world. And we did again the same, what I mentioned in terms of structure. We looked first of what's the right engagement. So we made personalized at-scale campaigns where we explained to our consumers why it's not just about mouth freshening, but also about potentially stress relief. Okay. We then created specifically native and fit for the platform content, like for Snapchat, for example, in this specific case. We then looked at the timing, when is the most stressful time for our target group, for example, students, which is usually during exams. We made big campaigns during this period. Then we looked at the right portfolio. We know that the consumer, the younger consumer prefers fruity flavors, and they're also very concerned about the affordability of the products. So we very much focused on over-the-counter single pieces, but also on fruity, and increased the space of fruity in all the stores. And finally, we obviously also did do a lot of sampling in all the key locations where we had our customers. So all this together allowed us to really drive chewing gum into a new direction. And over the last 3 years, I'm very happy to say it worked really well, and we had double-digit growth across all markets in our region in chewing gum for the last 3 years.
Well, that's incredible result for a really established brand. Right. You mentioned retail media. I just want to touch on it quickly. When you're thinking about that broad campaign, how did retail media fit into that mix?
Yeah, so in terms of retail media, we see it basically as part of the media ecosystem, and we see it as a bridge between brand awareness into conversion and purchase. Okay. Whenever we do a big retail media campaign, we usually make a big activation, combine it with tactical displays and also sponsorship. And when we work very close with the retailer together, we can clearly see a difference. We can see an uplift between 2 and 3 times versus a very basic marketing campaign which only focuses on advertisement or only on trade spends.
Okay, really interesting. I want to move this on because I'm really conscious of time, because I want to talk about demand creation. Really big topic. So how are you thinking about using new technologies and emerging technologies to help with demand creation at Mars?
Yeah, very good question. So we use AI for quite some time already. So we use it also internally and externally. Internally for planning, for insights, also for innovation, for forecasting, and many other topics. Yep. And externally, as you ask, we use it for innovative brand campaigns, but also, for example, for the execution of planograms, which we also do through AI. So we really try to use it as much as we can. But we also defined clear ethical guidelines and clear strategies in order to make sure that we follow the brand guidelines in terms of accountability, safety, privacy, inclusivity, and making sure there's no harm through AI as well, which is very important for us as well.
Yeah. One of the things that you and I have spoken about when we've been preparing is the really interesting and innovative work you've been doing in this space with Snickers. Can you share the details behind that? Because I think that's be really illuminating for everybody.
Yeah, so last year we did probably the first ever generative AI campaign at scale in a large market. So we chose the Snicker brand platform, You're Not You When You're Hungry, and basically focus on the topic of own goals in terms of football. Okay. We used Bukayo Saka and Luka Modric in order to basically celebrate whenever they were off their game and they needed the Snickers to be back on their game. But most importantly, we did specifically for the UK, especially innovative collaboration with Jose Mourinho, which is a very famous trainer, as you know, in football. And what we did is basically creating a generative AI platform where you as a consumer can basically create a video for one of your friends when they made an own goal and give advice through Jose Mourinho, through the latest technology of voice and video AI, to really give a snappy advice to your colleague. And this was a unique campaign, which is the first ever, if you want, generative AI campaign at scale with co-creation, which we tried. And we had a massive response. As we only did it in the UK, we still had over 444 million impressions. We had 0 safety incidents, which was one of our major worries. And we had a dwell time of over 2 minutes, which usually would be a benchmark of 1.3 seconds. Wow. And won several awards. So it was really amazing success.
Okay. Amazing story. One final question. You're getting people to use generative AI to get Jose Mourinho to shout at people. Surely everyone just made him swear. Is that what you want for Snickers brand? How did you control that?
Yeah, it was a good question, and it was also a big concern for us. So we had 8 levels of filters, AI filters.
Okay.
When you enter the data, plus with another layer of basically checking the content, of avoiding any, let's say, words or expressions which would be obviously not fitting our ethical standards. And we also did a massive testing beforehand because we were really concerned that this could go wrong. So we're very happy that we managed to do that at scale, on a large scale, if you want, without any major incidents. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating campaign, and I would recommend anybody to Google it and see. But for now, we're out of time. Marc, Carena, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.